everyone. It is Tony. I am back with another episode of Women In. As always, I'm thrilled for you to hear from my next guest. But before we get into this wonderful individual, let me tell you what you're listening to. Women In is a podcast that celebrates women and the individuals in their lives who are lifting them up. You're going to hear from someone amazing in my life who is really cool, by the way. And he's going to share the stories that impact all the extraordinary women around them. This is a space to be disruptive, forward-thinking, and change agents for humankind. It is uncensored, fun, and curiosity-driven. I often get asked what I'm passionate about and why I chose to launch this podcast, and here is the why. I'm passionate about breaking down barriers for my kids' generation. It's equal parts about my guests and the places we came into each other's lives, whether it be the Kalamazoo Wings, Mindfulness Elevated, Tony Will Coaching, or the guests happen to be my family and friends circle. And this guest today is no exception. He falls into multiple categories. I'm thrilled to introduce Clarence Lloyd. Clarence is the Vice President with Southwest Michigan First and serves as the Director of the Chamber of Commerce, covering all greater Kalamazoo County. His business and community leadership spans nearly 3 decades, where he has excelled in repairing underperforming teams, building new ones, and providing servant leadership for companies ranging from 5 employees to Fortune 50. During this time, Clarence also began to connect his experiences and observations growing up in the city of Detroit with his desire to foster authentic connections across the divides of sex, race, and socioeconomics, a passion that still drives him today. Clarence moved to Kalamazoo to attend Western Michigan University and is now a proud Bronco alum. He and his wife of nearly 20 years have 3 boys, ages 17 to 23. He also enjoys having conversations about the stuff you're not supposed to talk about with friends and coworkers, playing music via trivia games, and cheering on his Detroit Lions. It is no wonder that Clarence is not only a coworker, peer, community contact, and friend, because we have so many of the same things in common. So, hi, Clarence.
What's up? Thanks for having me. This is great.
I am so excited because I too love to have conversations that most people don't want to have. And that's part of why I launched Women In, because let's talk about this shit. And that's the disruptive part. We get to swear if we want to.
I was going to ask that. I was like, if it happens, is that okay?
You're damn right.
Yeah, let's jump right in. You know what? Listen, let me just start just really quick. I read your article in Encore magazine, and I felt like I was really hearing from you when they had to bleep a couple words. I was like, that is the Tony I know. I love it so much.
So it's interesting you bring that up, and we'll get in a minute how we met, because I always ask like one question that's off my list, and I think that one's important. But that Encore magazine article, when I read it, it's when you read about yourself, it's kind of weird. And I was like, wow, this chick. And I'm like, oh, wait, that's me. And I wasn't sure how, I was a little like imposter syndrome, but dang, Tony, maybe you need to take it down a notch with the fuck you fuel. But I'm just rolling with it.
Roll with it. You know, I feel like that's where the connection is, right? It's in that authenticity, because other people are like, oh, like that frees me up to be authentic too. I love it.
Good. Well, thank you. That means a lot, because I grapple with that at times, so, and I got more of that coming my way this year when I released my first book, which is, that's scary too. So, but this isn't about me. This is about you. So I want to start with telling the world how you and I met. And I love this, because the reason I ask this question is because people can come into our lives, as you know, in many different ways. And you were such a gift to my life. So how do you recall us first meeting?
So I'm glad you said, how do you recall it? Because I am positive that, we'll probably have different perspectives on when that was. What I remember, though, was you were working for the chamber at the time. And I want to say the first time was you hosted an event when the office was right on Michigan there. And there was like a conference room that faced out towards Michigan. And we're in a big U or circle or something like that. And you're in the middle. And it was really the first time that I had engaged with the chamber at all. But what really was engaging about it was you. And I felt like your energy was just so warm. It was professional, but it was relatable. And just the way that you communicated and carried yourself and engaged with the room. Obviously, we didn't know each other then, but I was like, I feel like she's my people. That's what I remember first. And I'm not sure when we actually had our first like real conversation, because I came to a couple other events after that. But I just know that we've always been, really warm and friendly, and we felt like friends for a longer time, probably even than we've been.
Oh, 100%. You were one of these people in my life where I felt like, because I don't know that I can pinpoint the time where we officially met. I do remember this though. Cynthia Hernandez, a mutual friend of ours, and that's her maiden name, but she said, Clarence Lloyd at the time when you were at Consumers Credit Union
Hmm.
wants to meet you. And I said, okay, yeah. And I remembered that. But then I always felt like you were we just got along so quickly. There was a trust immediately. And I think it's that from my end, it's that authenticity you and I both bring to this relationship and what our personalities are.
100%. I'm so glad you mentioned Cynthia. I was just telling her the other day that because she and I have known each other. I mean, longer than I think we've even known each other. And but she's always just been such a really cool bright spot. She's much more settled now. She's got her adult life. When I met her, I think she was still a student or just getting out of college. But I've been really really blessed to be connected to folks like y'all who care about community. They've been connected in downtown in Kalamazoo and the greater Kalamazoo area for a long time. And just the fact that so many cool folks know each other and have been willing to share that with other people, I think has been a really good thing.
Yeah, and speaking of lifting that particular woman up, Cynthia is truly one of the bright spots in my life too, because what the listeners don't know, and they're going to hear right now, I used to work at Southwest Michigan First, and Clarence's job is what I did.
That's
Uh,
right.
isn't that now? Talk about like
It's Kismet. Full circle. It's all the things.
Kismet, full circle. Yeah, so I that's how I met Cynthia, and we to this day we just had breakfast last weekend. Like
I love
she is just this amazing person in my life and in your life, and she's a little different than you and I in the sense. So she does listen to the podcast where you and I don't mind to be the face of anything, and she's more behind the scenes, and she's pumping us up, right, to do
it.
what we do, and she's our ally in all things. So
Mhm.
Cynthia, we love you.
We love you. She's the best. Yeah, one of the things that I get to see up close now that I'm here is just how she is able to do what she does and curate an experience. But I think that that's a part of being a connector. And that really is one of the things that, I know that you are, continue to be, and have always been. It's one of the things that I enjoy being. And even though somebody like that isn't, necessarily the face of, a lot of the more public things, but she's certainly making connections in the background, whether it be connecting people like you and I, or connecting, a group to a community, or whatever it is. Those connectors, where they're pretty priceless.
100%. And that can be really sage advice to anyone listening to this. Like, what are you doing because we're coming up on 5 years since COVID kicked off and everything became way more virtual and we weren't connecting as much. And how can we enhance our connections, enhance our community, our own community, not just the community you and I happen to live in, but ironically, we're doing this podcast virtual. So, okay. Clarence, tell me, speaking of podcast, Clarence is a podcaster too. And so you do with your wife. And I do want to talk about that. But tell me why you agreed to be on this podcast, on my podcast, beyond the fact that we're friends.
Yeah, so yes, obviously the fact that we're friends, but I, and I always want to be, mindful and respectful. So if I misword anything, just know that, charge it to my head and not to my heart. The strongest people that I've known my whole life are women. I was raised in a single family home. It's just my mom and my sister, my younger sister. Um, any strength that I have is because of them. Every leader that I reference, that I think back on, are women. It's really important to me to be able to speak to that part of myself and of others, right? Like, there's the masculine and the feminine, like outside of gender, but just inside of who we are. And that feminine part of me, I think, has helped me be more successful in life than any other part, whether it be just an ability to connect and to relate to other folks and to operate with compassion, but also to be able to be strong and take situations head on as needed. And so I appreciate the fact that you are shining an even brighter light on the things that that women are doing in community and in their lives and in our world. And so just being a part of it it's an honor. So that's why I want to do it.
I love that. And the reason I started the podcast was because I found about 2 years after I left Southwest Michigan first, I came to the Kalamazoo Wings, and did I think I'd be running a hockey team? Hell no. But here I am 10 years later still, and I love it. It's the best job I never knew I wanted. But what I learned once I kind of took my head out of the work for a minute and looked up and looked around was that I was a major minority in pro sports. I didn't know that going into it because that's not, I love my community, right? Just like you do. I love a challenge. And I didn't go into this job thinking I'm going to break glass ceilings. And I mean, none of that verbiage was even in my vocabulary at that stage. And so that's kind of where this was born from. And you being a Black man and willing to talk about things that are uncomfortable, how can you relate to that in your own journey? In Kalamazoo, I don't know the race demographics per se, but there's more white people here than not. So talk about that side of your life and navigating through this in your career and the community we both love.
You know, what's really interesting, and I've really tried to dig into this a little bit, but what I am aware of for sure is that where I grew up in Detroit, is where I'm from originally, and it was, God, the communities that I was in was probably like 98% Black to anything else. You know, there was a handful of white folks around. A lot of times they were teachers, and on occasion we had some classmates. And so really, when I came here to Kalamazoo, you would say typically something like, you know, there was culture shock, but I'm not sure that there was. For whatever reason, my soul was prepared, and I don't know where that happened. And I think that has served me well. I remember a couple key stories. One is I lived on campus. I was able to become an RA very quickly, definitely by my second year, maybe even the second part of my first year.
Because you're a born leader.
I mean, it was happening, right? It had started. So, but I remember having a series of really important conversations. And I don't know that I realized the importance of them then. My approach was always that we are more alike than we're different. And I would much rather people feel comfortable saying and asking any question than to go on potentially being ignorant or not knowing or just not saying anything. I just wanted there to be this openness where we could have these communications, because it felt like that was the difference between oftentimes this tension and this contentiousness between people who grew up differently, and where we could be. I remember having these really great conversations with people that were also RAs or people that lived on my floor. And I really fell in love with the idea of not necessarily trying to be a representative of, you know, Black folks. You know, we're not a monolith, we're all different, but being able to share my experience in a way that maybe created some relatability, where people could say like, oh, I guess I never thought of that, or I haven't experienced that, or I have experienced that, you did too. And it felt like that place of connection was one that I really wanted to continue to explore. Recently, in this role, we had a business breakfast roundtable. So it's like an educational seminar that we do once a quarter. And that one of the first conversations that I had with somebody that was an RA with me, her name is Colleen. We had the best conversation as teenagers, RAs on staff, about race and what that meant in our lives. Fast forward, she has recently been a global leader of diversity, equity, and inclusion for a multinational company, helping others have similar conversations and making sure that their company acknowledge those things too. And so, and she has, you know, humbly, she has connected the dots on that conversation, really being the beginning of her journey and understanding that stuff better too. So just anytime I can plug in and make that connection, it's cool. I don't necessarily lead with it, but I do recognize that many of the rooms that I'm in, I'm one of one, and I would like to see that change. And it's a long journey. One last thing I'll say about that is, as someone who is when I was at Consumers Credit Union, we had to do that networking, right? It was like, you got to grow your office, you got to find some people that you can serve and that kind of thing. And of course, because I was in downtown primarily, a lot of people that I was serving were just kind of around me. But over time, as I got more into community development, I started to meet other African American professionals. And we, have some conversation. How long you been here? Oh, I've been here, 10 years. I'm like, you are in an environment where we just have never really crossed paths, but you've been right there the whole time. And I wonder how many other people like that are out there. And so in this role here at the chamber, we've created some programming really to try to find those people and help them feel a greater sense of community so that they don't show up to events in their one of one. They can really show up and feel like they can let their hair down and feel perhaps a bit more comfortable because folks in the room have, maybe a more similar lived experience. And so I really take that seriously as well. But I think that's kind of the arc, right? Is, kind of where I came from, but feeling ready and finding those ways to connect the dots along the way.
Yeah, I mean, that really touched my heart, especially when you said one of one, because that's what I found in my when I stepped into this role. I never thought about my race or my gender, and I was one of those people, and I didn't even know, like, I love people for people, right? Like, and I didn't stop, like, I love Clarence for Clarence, and I would be like, yeah, he's black, but what does that matter? Right? Like, no one ever brought up, I didn't look at you and think, oh, I want to be friends with him because he's black. Like, so it's like because I like you, right? But it's like, but there is the other side of that. When you are one of one, there are times where that should be acknowledged, right? Because you bring a different perspective and I bring a different perspective when we are the minority in the room, when we are the one of one. And I think for me, that's the tricky part. Like, how do we have that conversation without turning everyone else off who doesn't think like we do?
Yeah, I think that's critical. I was just what it makes me think of is, when we launched this program, it's called the Black and Brown Connect Mixer. We got some snarky comments. I mean, even recently from people who are relatively close to us. And it's like, why are you making it about race? And like, just basically like, just come to the stuff that's already there. Like, why do you have to put a title on it? But yet when we have a veterans focused event or a woman focused event or, some event that is about people who have a similar shared experience, people don't seem to necessarily always find those perhaps threatening. I don't know if that's the wrong word. They understand those gatherings. And so I think that it is really important for us to acknowledge the fact that while we do have lots of things in common, and while there is value in a variety of spaces that currently exist, that there is a ton of value for people to be in the room with folks who maybe get it differently. I was just so thinking about my wife. She's in human resources. She's a consultant now, but even just going to an HR conference, why be around other HR folks? Because you've got inside jokes and you get it, right? Like, there's a shorthand you have because your experience has something in common already. And maybe there's a bunch of other things that you don't have in common, but that part is a place of alignment. Now, what can we do together? How do we make one another feel more a part of community? And there's a variety of ways to do that. But it is interesting that people oftentimes, you really don't hear people have concerns about, a woman-focused group the way that you do maybe about a more ethnic-based group.
So I have to tell you, because I get all the emails from Southwest Michigan First, as you all communicate out the fabulous work you can continue to do. And I mean, I'm over here at Wings Event Center pumping my fist going, black and brown, we're in. And I forwarded that because our head coach is black. One of my sales managers is black. And I'm like, yes, if you want to be surrounded by people like you, and just so you're not the only one in the room, look at what our community is doing.
Yeah.
And that stems from you, Clarence, like as a change maker. And so anyone listening to this saying, what can I do in my community? These are ideas that Clarence has done with the Black and Brown group. And I want to touch on the difference between Black and Brown. And then also like the work I do with women in sports or women in dot, 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 because the dots are meant to be all different spaces women are in. I happen to be in sports, but your wife, Monica, happens to be in human resources. And it doesn't mean it has to be what we do for a living because
Right.
we're defined by so many things, not just one.
100%.
So, ooh, I feel like we're going to church, Clarence.
Come on with it.
Talk to me about the black and the brown naming and then the difference to educate people on what that means who don't know the difference, why the brown is called out and black is like why they're separated. And it's not just, so explain that piece for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the perspective really is when you think about the communities really that are most prominent here in Kalamazoo, and where a lot of our um, leadership, the backgrounds that they come from, um, what we find is that those are really kind of two of the groups are that have a large presence. They are, doing some community organizing individually and intentionally, and historically, just across communities across the country. We have found that Black and Brown communities have really needed to be aligned in many ways. A lot of times, where our neighborhoods were sort of um, placed, or those things tended to be closer to one another. And because there's that kind of historical connection, a lot of times you'll find that Black and Brown communities are often impacted similarly when it comes to health outcomes or educational outcomes, or all sorts of things that impact all communities, but that have a particular impact in those communities. And so the Black and Brown Connect really was just a way to say, like, hey, we want to use this as an opportunity to say, like, if you are a professional here in town, we want you to come here and feel a part of this community as well, right? So there are other community organizations doing great things, but this specific one is about business. It's about connecting and learning and hearing what other people are up to, finding an important connection inside a business maybe that you see all the time, but didn't realize that maybe you had a friend there, maybe you had a partner there that you just haven't met yet. And so I think that the historical connection really kind of comes out of some of what I was describing there. But what we are finding is that the Hispanic and Latinx populations that come are really tightly connected. And so they've been really great about helping us grow the group and, inviting folks. And, we make sure that the music reflects that. We make sure that the food reflects that. This year, we want to be even more intentional about making sure that the conversation reflects that. And then, obviously on the African American side, I understand that better, but we certainly want to be mindful of, like, what are those conversations that we need to be having as communities that have this kind of really interesting history, so that we can leave the room feeling even more prepared to, take on what's in front of us, whether it be at home or at work.
Yeah. Again, I applaud it. And I feel like when you do get some pushback, that's when change is being seen, felt, and heard, and we're moving in the direction. It's positive. If we were just doing things that were safe, how are we growing and changing?
Or not?
We're not.
Yeah.
And I get it. Rainbow Ice was just last weekend, and oh boy, you get it, it's polarizing.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember learning about, some of what happens during those types of events before. And it, on one hand, again, on one hand, it's a bummer. But on the other hand, it it is an opportunity. And I believe that every time that happens, exactly what you say, every time that happens, someone inches just a little bit closer to a higher level of understanding, a higher level of, I don't want to say tolerance, but just knowing that there's people out there maybe that grew up different than they are, who are different than they are, but that's not a threat. Like, we're just who we are, and that's okay. And it's good to celebrate those differences. Those differences don't all have to be bad.
Right. Exactly. And we can learn from them. Like, allow yourself to get a little uncomfortable. So let me ask this because I get asked this when I host a women in sports event, like at the National Sports Forum, or you're hosting a black and brown event. If someone comes to my events, and it's a man, they're like, can I come? And I'm like, are you an ally? Yeah. Yeah. So let me ask you this. If I showed up as a white woman to your event, clearly I'm not black or brown, especially in January. I'm as white as they come in Michigan because there's no sun right now. But
No, son. Oh,
now, would I be welcome there?
100%. I'm so glad you asked that question. So this was something we talked about. I remember early, and this is I don't know, I'm just gonna tell you, but I remember earlier, like when we were really just kind of getting started, the first 2 or 3 events, there was a noteworthy number of non-black or brown folks in the room. I'll say that, right? And so again, there's some historical significance to maybe how that felt to some of the people who were there. And we heard that feedback. We heard feedback from some of the attendees who were black, let's say, about like why other people were there. Like this is our event. And we wanted to kind of stop that right at the beginning and say for so many years, and in so many situations, we have felt excluded from things. And I don't think that the answer is to create things to then exclude other people. I think that the opportunity exists for us again to create points of connection, of relatability, of understanding. Now, that's not going to change what this group is and what we're about and what the vibe is and what we're talking about. And we want to speak authentically and candidly, no matter who's in the room, because that's just important, period. And so I wanted people to still have that element of psychological safety, though I know that that can impact some, but 100% of people are invited. It is an inclusive room. If people are interested and they want to come and learn and make connections, I have good friends that have been there that are white, that are, not black or brown, that have come and have really had a great time. And one of the comments that we always hear is how warm it feels. And I don't mean just in heat. I mean, just it feels much more familial than sometimes a room might feel if you're just at a networking event.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, there's some differences culturally, and it's not like a better or worse. It's just an acknowledgement that there is a warmth that anyone who attends one of these will feel. It will be noteworthy. You'll pick up on it. And so we invite people if you're interested, if you're curious, if you want to come and be a part of it, then come check it out.
Yeah, and that's the whole part about inclusivity, right? Like, and I talk about this specific to the name of this podcast because I invite men, obviously you're a man, on this podcast just like I do women. And I point that out because number one, the word men is in women.
Mhm.
And number two, men came from women.
Mhm.
And number three, there are women in the men that are on this podcast in their lives that are very important to them, and I want to hear about those women in your life, whether it's your wife, your mom, nieces, community, peers, a teacher, I could keep going. So it's about everyone. It's everyone's welcome. This isn't about excluding anybody. So I just applaud the beautiful work again that you're doing to carve out a safe space for others in minority groups, but also include those of us who are in majority groups that want to be supportive and show up and learn. Like, let's get curious. Let's find out how we can collaborate together. And we have a lot in common. So speaking of the women, tell me about the women in your life. And I always like to preface this with, be careful. Don't miss anyone that you want to make sure, because you'll be getting a phone call from grandma if you miss her. Because that happened.
I believe it. That doesn't surprise me at all. Well, I'm gonna keep it really simple. There's 4 key women in my life. Key, right? Lots of great people who are connected, continue to be. Of course, my wife is number one. She is. I have only had one best friend, and it's her. And we've been best friends for 20 years. been married for 19. Um, and I am so thankful that our paths crossed where they did, and the way that they did. Just really quickly, the story there is we both worked at a church, not because we're necessarily churchy people, it's just where the job was. But the work that I was doing and the work that she were doing didn't have anything to do with one another, but we were the two youngest people on the staff. And so we ended up always having lunch together. Now, at the time, she was in a relationship. I was fresh out of a relationship. But that fact kept us from being able to pursue anything, right? So we had to be friends because that was the nature of the relationship that we had. And we were great friends. We started to hang out and get to know each other, but all under this, without any of the other stuff that muddies things up. And I am positive that continues to pay great dividends in our relationship. That is why we're best friends today. That is why we have such a good relationship, is because she can push me, she can call me out, she can communicate with me in truth and love, and I can hear it as my friend. When we disagree, I want reconciliation with my friend, not just with my girlfriend. You know what I mean? So she's number one. And then of course my mom. My mom is she's been the model of unconditional love, continues to be hard work, high expectations, loving life, loving your family, teaching people how to treat you. The love of volunteering, the love of service for others, but out of your overflow, right? Not out of your lack. She's always been this smooth, easy, steady force. That this lighthearted person that really when I look back and learn more about what was happening while I was growing up that I couldn't see because I was just a kid, I have my respect for her grows every day. So she's another one. And then I have Mom, the sequel. So my godmother, it's my auntie. Now, growing up, I thought auntie was kind of like you say, like your aunt. You can also call them like your auntie, right? Like your auntie Sarah or whatever, right? But it's Aunt T because her first name is Teresa. I didn't know that until I was an adult. So,
I love that.
so my auntie, she is, for such an important part of our growing up, it felt like just as much time there. Like we're either at school, we're at auntie's, or we were probably asleep at home because she was where we were while my mother was working. My mom, and I hopefully I have an opportunity to tell this story, but my mom worked a variety of different shifts, not like multiple jobs at the same time, but like, first, second, third shift. When she was working second shift, she would she'd take us to school and then she would go to work while we were at school. So when we came home, she was still at work. Well, auntie was our mom then. So she was dinner and bed and homework and all of that stuff for years and years and years. And to this day, if you need something, auntie's got you. She still tries to put $20 in my pocket when I see her. I'm like, auntie, I'm positive I'm making more for you. Anyway, I love auntie. She's our second mom the sequel. And then lastly, my sister. Me and my sister are about 4 years apart. And we had a contentious relationship growing up. We have different fathers. She was right at the age where she wanted to be around, but she was like too young, and she was like my little sister, right? She was like, get out of here, and it was just, in some ways, it was probably a sort of typical brother, sister, like older sibling, younger sibling relationship. And honestly, I wish that we had been nicer to each other then. Thankfully, as we aged, and she came back to the area, she left to go to college. When she came back to the area, we were able to really establish a much stronger, warmer relationship. She lived in Chicago until her last year. She passed away in 2017 from breast cancer. But it was probably the 18 months leading up to that where we really, she felt like my sister, right? Like she felt like the person that's as close to me as anybody else. And I appreciated all that she is and all that she has been really this whole time, so much more in that little condensed period of time that, that'll last me for the rest of my life. And so I'm glad that we had that time. And it makes her one of my four.
Oh, well, I'm sure she's an angel in heaven. I'm sorry to hear about that loss. That's very hard and certainly unfair because she was clearly much too young to
Yeah.
have passed away. Now, I always like to ask, the we know Monica is your queen, your wife, but what's your mom's name and your sister's name, and then auntie. So please say their names because I'm sure they're going to want to listen to this. So we want to hear their names.
So my mom is Melba. Melba, we don't have a great nickname for her, but I remember learning that there was a food called Melba toast, and I just was so tickled by that. So Melba toast. Um, and then my sister's name is Tamika. Tammy, Tamaram, Tamalam, I mean, just all the, Tamika is her name, and then my auntie is Teresa, Terry.
Terry. Okay. Now, again, on maybe on the topics, and I did not prep you this off air, and you and I have never had this conversation as friends either, that I recall. So I'm going to go someplace, and if I need to edit this, which I don't do my editing, I have someone else that does. But if I need to edit this, you tell me.
I'm so intrigued.
I know because, and I don't know if many people do ask you about your marriage because, in the sense that you are an interracial couple, correct?
Yes, we
Okay.
are.
Now, is this okay to talk about?
100%. Let's go.
Okay. So what was that like for you when you and Monica navigated into that relationship 20 years ago? Because let me just tell you a little story that you don't know about me. So I went to private school for a period of time here in Kalamazoo. And in seventh grade, there were 13 of us in my seventh grade class. And there was a young, and I don't, if he happens to listen to this podcast, give me a call, Ari. But there was a boy there named Ari Lewis, and he was a black kid. And he was my boyfriend for a period of time in seventh grade. And I took a picture with him, and that was back in the day when you go to the store and get them developed, and my parents saw that and they were really upset. And that, and this isn't to out my mom and dad,
No.
they're not racist by any stretch of the imagination, they're just of a different generation, but they were like, Tony, if you are ever in an interracial relationship, it's going to be so much harder for you. And I'm like 12, 13 years old, and I'm like I am now, but so take off 30 years, 30 plus years. And so I didn't, because I like the person, right? But that's the first time I got that messaging as a child that it was not normal. And I'm like, why is that not normal? Just because we're different, skin color. Like I just didn't get it back then, right? So that was 30 years ago. And obviously times have changed, but I have like, this isn't a conversation I've had before in this podcast, and I feel like I want to hear what your and Monica's experience is like then, 20 years ago, and to now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I'm not sure that we have really talked about it a ton. I mean, she and I have, but with anyone else too. So, but let's get into it. So like I mentioned, when I grew up, it was, pretty much all black people. I didn't really know anyone white, not know, just knew of. And coming to school, and that had changed. I feel like the environments that I was in over time probably, I'm going to say, softened me up to the idea. It had never crossed my mind. And honestly, I think probably was socialized to think that it wasn't necessarily something that would be well received, right? That a black man dating a white woman specifically, so not outside of his race, but specifically a white woman, just because of some of the historical trauma that a lot of people still feel, and that we all contend with in some way or another, just would really feel hurtful to particularly to other women who were black as well. And so I just had never really thought about it. And I wasn't consciously saying like, no, or it's not that I was unattracted to people. I was just living my life, and the people that you are closest to, that you have the most proximity with, are the ones that ultimately you end up connecting to. Well, I think that being a part of, all those environments that I was in school and in work, had really, kind of made it so that I didn't have that, I'm going to call it sort of baggage, or I didn't have those thoughts or feelings about it anymore. Again, not thinking about it consciously. It's just a matter of who you're around. Well, who I was around had changed significantly, but I was still aware that if I was to, look at the girl that I'm working with who is no longer dating that guy and say like, I feel like she and I could be more than best friends. There's so many things that we have in common. I really feel like we'd have a great relationship. My first thought went to, what will my friends think? And what will my mom think? And, my mom's, she hasn't been married before. Would she feel like somehow her son was like betraying? Like, I just, there's some complexity there that I didn't know how to navigate. But honestly, the strength of my feelings for her made it worth it to continue to move our relationship forward, and sort of say like, hey, I'm bringing somebody home this weekend. Okay, cool. She's white. Like, just kind of put it out there, right? And kind of testing for what's going to happen, because I've always been, less so now, just in my old age, but I've always been somebody who, the people who are closest to me, like, I need them to tell me it's okay, right? Like, I see what's going on, and whether or not I even agree, like, I love you. And that is overwhelmingly what I heard, and unfortunately that was a pleasant surprise. I wasn't anticipating it. But whether it be my, fraternity brothers from college, whether it be my sister, I'll tell you a funny story about that in a second, whether it be my mom, everyone overwhelmingly was like, I don't care, right? Like, you love her? Yeah, great, can't wait to meet her, right? So funny story, when I told my sister, Tamika happens to be gay. So I told her, and we were just planning to meet in Detroit at mom's house for Christmas. And so I was saying like, hey, Monica's coming, so you'll get a chance to meet her. She's white, just, heads up or whatever. I don't want you to be shocked and, be all weird when you see her for the first time. And she was like, man, poor mom. And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, her daughter's gay and her her son's dating a white girl. And I was like, but you know what? My mom is just amazing. It's been nothing but love. She calls Monica her daughter in love. I mean, she has absolutely just adopted her as her daughter, and always has from day one. There's absolutely love there, and of course, that always makes it easy too. I would say, just, fast forward to today. Rarely do the place where it shows up the most is in how we advise our kids. Our kids, even though they are half and half, they are Black men to the world. And so there are things that Monica did not grow up hearing or thinking about having to talk to young people about, to talk to your kids about, whether it be related to the police or how other people might treat you or perceive you. Not things that we want you to go out into the world with fear, or we want you to go out into the world with like a chip on your shoulder, but we also don't want you to be surprised and shocked. We don't want you to be taken off guard by what's out there, because it's reality. And I think that some of the weight of the Black experience was new for her as well. And just us being able to have some honest and candid conversations about, my experience and even her experience, right? She grew up in Kalamazoo and fairly diverse schools, but just to have that different perspective and to be able to then translate that to now our children, I think has been an important part of our relationship development as well. The last thing I would say is, there are still people who do look at people like me, who are, dating a white person, as, selling out or somehow betraying the culture. And people are entitled to their opinions, and people's experiences are different. And so I get that. But largely what I see is that more and more people are coming to understand that love is just that. And it is not something that you are checking a bunch of boxes about the exterior. It's not a car, right? Like, you are interacting, you're engaging with people, and when two spirits connect, I mean, that's something that the outside is just incidental. The inside is really what counts. And for two people who grew up, one in Kalamazoo and one in inner city Detroit, to have so much in common and to have so much fun together, and to be looking at, anything and see the same little weird thing I mean, it's just, to me, that means something, and that's really been, what we always hold fast to is our friendship, and the fact that we have so much in common still.
Yeah. I thank you for talking about and like educating me personally, and then of course the audience on that, because as you're sharing this, I never thought to consider what it would feel like to be able to say, hi, Mom and Dad, I'm going to introduce you to Josh. I never had to say, oh, by the way, Josh is white. Right, and
Yeah.
how that brings in an extra layer of worry, stress, like, and all the questions you were asking yourself or experienced, but the love that you received back, because Monica is a great person. And I've had other guests on this podcast that are in interracial marriages, and both ways, black women married to white men, and not just black and white, but there are
Mhm.
other races too. But I don't think what I like to do is ask, because I'd want someone to ask me. Like, there are times that you can be a white man and be a minority in a room,
Mhm.
right? Like, just like you can be a interracial couple and be a couple that is a minority inside of another minority in the room, right? And to be willing to talk about it and not ignore it if you're interested, like, really curious because you want to learn,
Yeah.
you know? It's not offensive, which is, I like to make that point, because I think people are afraid to ask sometimes.
They are. I do, and I think that, kind of back what we were talking about before, that I recognize that fear exists because of a lot of things that we see on television, online, that there are probably people who are curious, who want to understand more, or maybe who think that they do, and maybe they do or don't, I don't know. But having someone that you can talk to openly and without fear of, you know, permanently damaging the relationship, I think is just such a value. And listen, I mean, for you or anybody else, right? Like, I am always willing to tell you what I think. And if you ask a question that is like, that's interesting, let's talk about that, right? Like, that's what we'll do, is we'll talk about it. I'm not going to be like, I can't believe you asked me that, and I'm out of here. I would just say for people to continue to explore that. I know that right now things can feel really divisive, and what's often not unsaid is that sometimes those things can involve issues of race and culture and ethnicity. But I would just encourage us to continue to, find the things about us that bring us together, where we have alignment. That's always the place we can start. And of course, there's differences that we can learn about, but I would just encourage everybody to continue to find ways to connect, because they're there if you're willing to look for
So we're gonna, Clarence and I could talk all day, but we're gonna have to start wrapping this up. So Clarence, as we close out this time, I know I'll have you back on Women In, but where can people find you? And I want you to take this time too to talk about your podcast, because Clarence and Monica have a podcast too. So where can people find you for the podcast if they want to connect with you and learn about, like, maybe they want to start a black and brown group in their community or their organizations? Like, where do they look? Where do they find Clarence Lloyd?
them. Yeah. So I don't know if it's good or bad, but I'm fairly easy to find. The chamber here, the Southwest Michigan First Chamber, is really excited about all the things that we're doing right now. You can find me at a chamber event. We have at least 5 every month, covering a variety of different things. But if you go to the southwestmichiganfirst.com website, under upcoming events, you'll see a listing of events. If it's a chamber focused one, it'll say it, and the likelihood is I'll be there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an easy way to do it. Of course, you can also find me on that website, and my email address is there. Our podcast is really fun. This is Monica's brainchild. So she has an HR consulting group called People Forward, and she helps businesses really create these awesome and exciting workplaces that people want to go to. She wants to make sure that the work environment is one that people enjoy. And so she's helping companies do that. Well, out of that came People Mavens. So it is the podcast by people, for people. We talk about all things life, love, and leadership. We're on episode, I don't know, 11 or 12, something like that. I'm the editor, I should probably know. But we have fun. We record it right here in town at Public Media Network. And where it came from was, on Friday, one of the things that has been a treasure to our relationship, and it was given to her parents, which is why they gave it to us, is every Friday they would keep the kids and we would be able to go on a date every Friday. And I mean, what a blessing, right? And sometimes it'd be Friday night and they'd stay over to Saturday morning. And so one of our Friday nights, we were out, probably at Stamp Robin or something, grabbing a cocktail. And we would just be fresh out of work. And so we'd have all these like workish, lifey kind of things on our mind. You start having some fun. And then all of a sudden, we're having this really great conversation. And over time, it was like, man, it'd be cool if we could like let people in on some of the things we talk about. So that is what we talk about. And it's all manner of topics. So please go check it out if you haven't heard of it yet. Hopefully you like it. And but we have fun doing it. So you can hopefully feel that. And then the last place is you can find me at Ford Field rooting on the Lions because we're going to the playoffs. We're going to be there next week and taking on whoever wants to come get some because that's what we do. So those are some places you can find me for sure.
Yeah. I would love for you to send me Monica's contact. I'd love to have her on the podcast, talk about her work. So I'm going to book Monica.
Book it.
I'd love to have her. And I've listened to the podcast. I absolutely love it. And I love that you all are doing it together. And I love how much you two love each other, because I will tell you that as a woman that has been married 3 times, I got it right, number 3, but I always am in awe of a couple that has been able to navigate it together, because that's not something I've done successfully yet. I mean, I'm in a great marriage now, but you've been doing it from jump with Monica. So I applaud that. And I love how much you guys love each other. So
yeah, I feel really fortunate.
Send me that email. So if you need to find me, I'm like Clarence. I am not hard to find. Sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's not a good thing. But if you want to connect with me, I'm on all socials, Facebook and LinkedIn at Tony Lentini Will. I'm on Instagram at I'm Tony Will, and then all the websites. If you're looking for me on the hockey side of things, kwings.com or mindfulnesselevated.com, TonyWillCoaching.com, and I always respond back. So until next time, Clarence, it was such a joy, and I know I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Take care.